Hi there.
What information do you need to gather in a tenancy application?
Okay, in-depth versus brief. That's the summary in one sentence. Get as much information as you can about the tenant prospect, because the more you know about them, the more likely it is you're going to get the right tenant for your property. Such things as identification, passport, driver's license, other identification, anything that you can identify that person with, gather it if it's available. What about previous landlord? Capture as much details as you can from the previous landlord around that particular tenant. What about employment history? What about other referees? Anything that you can capture in your application that is potentially going to help you in identifying the quality of that prospect, then I recommend you gather that information.
So what makes a perfect tenant and how do you attract them?
Okay, perfect tenant. I'd love to say that every tenant is the perfect tenant. The reality is that's not the case. But such things that you should think about that potentially make that perfect tenant are, has that tenant currently own their own home, for instance? If they own their own home, and they have done for a number of years, well, they've probably had mortgages to pay. So if they've had mortgages to pay, they probably identify the ability to be able to meet their tenant payment obligations. So potentially a really good tenant for your property. What about the long-term tenants? Have they been a long-term tenant, maybe 5, 10 years somewhere, and clearly identified the ability to meet the payments for their tenancy obligations? One of the things that you should really think about is pricing your property to market price. Why should you price it to market price? Because if it's at market price, there is a misconception that if you price your property below market, you'll get a good tenant. But actually, the perfect tenant is more likely looking to pay market price for their property. They're looking for quality of the property, its location, etc., etc. But the key thing is they're happy to pay market rent for quality properties, and they're more than likely to be the good tenant that you're looking for. Doesn't matter whether it's in Waitakere, North Shore, City, South, we can look after that for you. And that is, we operate in all of those areas. But the key thing is, so do tenants. So let's make sure that we understand what that tenant can offer to your property.
Okay, everything what you said makes sense to me, but there's one question in my mind there, Barry.
Yes.
Look, it seems like a lot of money to pay just to collect the rent for us.
Okay, good question. The key thing is, of course, that we're generating revenue from your property should we be managing it, and obviously that's a number one priority for us, is to capture rent. But it's only one small portion of what we do for you. Remember, I've already covered some of the things that we already do when we're managing a property, but there is such things as rent. Obviously, number one is rent for you. But what about in identifying the tenant at the start of that process? A number of things I've already covered off in this video around what we're needing to capture, or what we're thinking about capturing for a prospective tenant. Then there's a tenancy agreement. Then there's photos and chattels and inspections. The inspections we're doing on a regular basis. Identification of repairs and maintenance. Are you getting those calls at 3 o'clock in the morning from a tenant who has an urgent repair and maintenance requirement? We are, and yes, we are managing those. That's one of the many, many things that we are doing and looking after your property. Now, you may want to be heavily involved in managing your property. We'll talk about that at the start of agreeing a contract with you. Now, if you want to be heavily involved, that may be that you don't want us to spend a cent for you in terms of repairs and maintenance unless you're consulted. That's fine, you can be involved. But what about the other side of the coin, where you're treating this as a business, as we treat your property? It's a business in its own right. So if it's a business in its own right, it may be in your interest to have us look after everything, inclusive of repairs and maintenance. Remember, the reason we're doing repairs and maintenance is to manage your property and maintain it, to ensure it's maintained at the level that it needs to be maintained at, which in turn maintains its capital value, helps continue to grow its yield through increased rents should that property be up to scratch. So we're doing those things to look after your investment and improve your investment. And remember, we operate Waitakere, North Shore, City, South. We operate everywhere around the Auckland-wide area.
So let's just say that I'm possibly interested. Will my property go into a pool with a number of property managers just look after everything, or a dedicated property manager?
Okay, yes, we run a large pool of properties, but the key thing is we have a dedicated property manager for your property, whether that be in the North Shore, whether that be in the city, whether that be south, whether that be west. We have a dedicated property manager that will look after your property. And I want to express upon you that I am only one phone call away. So whilst I have a dedicated property manager to help manage your property investment, as the owner of the property, I am there at any point in time that you can give me a call. And on that note, you can call me on 09 373 5400 or 0275 61 448. Email barry@ quinovic-newton.co.nz or inquiries@quinovic-newton.co.nz. Do you want to know more about my company? www.quinovic-newton.co.nz. Remember, Auckland wide. Great to hear from you.